It only takes one case of measles or other vaccine-preventable diseases for an outbreak to begin. But vaccines can prevent or lessen the severity of conditions for everyone. That's according to Peter Gulick, professor of osteopathic medical specialties at the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Sean Valles, professor and director of the MSU College of Human Medicine's Center for Bioethics and Social Justice. Gulick and Valles discuss the disinformation that leads to vaccine hesitancy and share respectful ways to educate citizens on the health benefits of vaccines.
Let me start, and Peter, why don't we start with you, a little bit about your time at MSU, what you do, why are you passionate about this work?
Well, I came to MSU back in '84, trained in infectious disease medical oncology. My whole career has been kind of centered around HIV because obviously I've seen it back before it was even recognized as a virus. GRID was the initial term, gay-related immunodeficiency. And so that's been kind of the common denominator in my career, although obviously I've done a lot of other infectious diseases. I've done medical oncology for 25 years, gave that up to concentrate more on HIV. And so that's been the one virus that I've been very much interested in. And then other viruses came about during my career. Hepatitis C I became involved with also back in the early 90s, and that was the next virus that came about. And then, things with outbreaks of influenza, and then obviously the COVID was the next big pandemic that came about really suddenly, kind of took everybody by surprise. But I've always been interested in patients, infectious diseases. Immunocompromised patients is one of the areas that's highly interesting to me since I've dealt with it with my cancer patients and now with HIV. So, anything related to that and how to control conditions with them and how to improve their immunity is very important.
Yes, well, and I know you know your stuff, Peter, because the media comes to you all the time for your expertise, which is very nice. So, and Sean, tell us a little bit about your role at the College of Human Medicine and about your Center for Bioethics and Social Justice, kind of the mission there, your passion for that work.
Yeah, I've been at MSU for actually quite a while now. I came in 2010. Straight out of graduate school. I had gotten my PhD in history and philosophy of science, working primarily in evolutionary biology theory and how it applies to human genetics and the uses and misuses of genetics. So making assumptions about which things are genetic, the history of eugenics and how it sort of still impacts us today. And from there I made my way into public health theory and into really focusing on social determinants of health and all the ways that the world that we live in every day is basically sort of subtly changing our health for better or for worse. And so, we sort of think about how important our health is when we go to the doctor maybe once a year, but then it's really the other 364 days of the year where the health happens. And so where do you live? What kind of air are you breathing? What kind of water are you drinking? Do you feel stressed at work? Do you feel like you have to turn down another street whenever you see a police car passing? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it makes a difference. And so that passion brought me to the opportunity to be the director of what was at the time the Center for Ethics and Humanities in the Life Sciences in the College of Human Medicine. It was part of an early wave of medical ethics centers that were established in colleges. And I came in and we just discussed what should our focus be? What can we be excellent at and sort of be distinctive in this space of medical ethics centers where when it was founded there were not that many and now there are many of them. And so what makes ours special? And so we discussed it, and we decided that we will focus on social justice. And so, how are all those ways that the world that we've designed in fair and unfair ways, and that affects us those 364 days of the year when we're not inside the doctor's office? How does that make it so that people have access to good health, so that people have enough food to eat, so that they don't have to live in fear, so that they're not being mistreated while they're at the doctor's office? And so all those things, that's just sort of our angle on these sort of big issues of medical ethics. And that also impacts vaccines, where it's not just what happens between you and the doctor and having that conversation. It's all the messages and thoughts and fears you have during those other 364 days of the year.
Well, Sean, you led me beautifully into the main topic we wanted to get you and Peter on. kind of the science and vaccination hesitancy we're seeing sort of a rise in, but maybe we want to start with how long have we had vaccinations, and they've always been accepted, or has there always kind of been this hesitancy?
Well, I guess I'm not sure exactly the dates, but I know they've been
In
there
general.
since the early 1900s. So it's not something that just came out of a box recently. But yeah, there's always been that the concept that we get exposed to pathogens all the time, and our bodies react to them, and some of them react well, others don't, based on a lot of factors, and ways to improve our immunity, or ways to protect ourselves better, to avoid problems rather than have to confront them. And over the years, and everybody can agree to this, we've seen changes in the evolution of different organisms, viruses, bacteria, etc., where they're becoming harder and harder to treat. There's becoming more of them. I mean, we rely on antibiotics all the time. That seems to be the main crutch everybody wants to grab onto. And we've created our own little, horror show, so to speak, where now we're dealing with multi-resistant organisms where there are no more antibiotics. We have organisms like Clostridium difficile as a result of antibiotics. And so now the main goal is for educators like myself is to talk to people about not using antibiotics or controlling the use rather than just giving an antibiotic out for every sneeze or cough or, congestion that occurs there. And so vaccines are an attempt to try to improve and do something for your body, try to improve your own immunity because many times, confronting a pathogen when you already have a pre-existing immune system, you may still get infected, no question about that, but you will not get the severity, the side effects, the complications that you would had your body been just totally exposed. And in the day and age now that we're dealing with, there's more and more and more immunocompromised patients. Our treatments of a lot of diseases like asthma and rheumatoid arthritis are all inflammatory conditions. So how do you deal with inflammation? You suppress inflammation. And what happens when you suppress inflammation? Well, you improve a condition like asthma, or you improve rheumatoid arthritis, or improve Crohn's disease, but you also expose yourself to an immunocompromised condition, and that's where then you get exposed to different organisms. And how do you protect yourself at that point? So vaccines are kind of one of those areas where hopefully that'll fill the gap.
Sean?
Yeah, it's funny because I think people think that somehow we can come up with some sort of solution to any kind of bug that's going to try to infect us. But if you think of it more like computer viruses, where there's never a final sort of this is the end all be all solution for computer security. If you just install this one thing, no virus will ever infect your computer no matter what you do. Like, no, there are hackers who are trying every single day to find a new way of sort of breaking through the defenses that you set up on your computer. And so it is this constant arms race, as some people put it. In evolutionary theory, they call it the Red Queen hypothesis. There's a line in one of the Alice in Wonderland books saying, you can. It seems like in order just to stay still, you need to run faster and faster just to sort of stay in place. And it's like that with our body is always trying. We're trying to adapt to the things that are these viruses and bugs. They're just trying to come in and reproduce. That's all they're trying to do, and our cells are how they do it. And so they're always adapting and reproducing and mutating and changing just a little bit and constantly evolving. And so we have to evolve our strategies against them. And so we need to make the best use of the vaccines and the antibiotics that we have. We need to come up with new ones. We need to adapt to new pathogens like Clostridium difficile, which is just a horrible infection that you can pick up in the hospital. And so it's we have to be active. We can't just sort of be passive in all of this. We need to sort of have like strategies and think carefully about this because there are a lot of bugs out there and they are evolving all the time and they have very short lives. And so their generations go real quick.
To what do you attribute sort of this rise in hesitancy, the misinformation, and why would people not want to have a vaccine that's going to make them healthier, I guess?
Well, there are a lot of different reasons. Some people just don't like getting a needle in their arm. Some people are worried about the ingredients. Some people sort of have a built distrust in the biomedical system. If you haven't had great care inside hospitals, it seems like all the new drugs that you see advertised on TV aren't really for people like you, or they're out of reach in affordability. And it's hard to build up that trust that this thing that's being put into your body while you're healthy. Usually we get treatments while we're sick, and so and typically you're getting a vaccine while you're feeling fine. And so the idea that you should get this shot that has these ingredients that'll do something that will change your body in some sort of way is a little intimidating. And so one thing that I think is very widely misunderstood is that people sort of want to have this binary of you're either like pro-vaccine or you're an anti-vaxxer, which is a term I really dislike. And so it's not that there are pro-vaccine people and there are anti-vaxxers. There's a spectrum of hesitancy. There's the people who are like, just give me whatever you got inside that syringe, like load me up. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's absolutely never. And I think there's this assumption that sort of everyone who has the slightest doubt is sort of on that far end of never, never, never. And that's just not the case. Most people are reasonable and willing to listen to arguments and to sort of have a conversation. And if you take people seriously, then maybe you can actually get somewhere with them.
You know, when a person gets something in their arm and all of a sudden their arm swells up and gets sore, or they get little bits of, fever in that, then it's right away. And I hear this so many times. It's like, well, I never had the flu, but once I got the vaccine, boy, did I get the flu. And it wasn't the flu. It was just your reaction to the vaccine. But that is one major concern. And then the other concern is with all this technology available now, you can find anything you want by just looking into Google or whatever, and you can find the most horrible things you want to find about vaccines, and then you can, because anything is publishable in Google, and you can get whatever you want. And then people, hear from other people, and then there's different groups of individuals, like black African Americans are fearful because they were used as experiments years ago with Tuskegee. And so, giving them something, you have to, really explain why you're doing it. And a lot of times in their communities, they grow up and, their parents or, whatever tell them, no, vaccines are not a good thing and this and that. So they get that in their mind, and other groups as well. And so there's those fears, and then you have these reports about, different conditions like autism and things like that is a result of a vaccine. And so that just adds more fear to it. And it's like, my body's strong enough, I'll be able to get rid of it myself. So why do I need a vaccine? And so then they rely on other aspects. A lot of people go into alternative therapies and stuff where they get over the counter. Not that they're bad or think they've just never been studied enough to know how effective they are, but they feel that they want to take control of a lot of things themselves, and vaccines is something that they feel like it's something invading it, and it might be even though we try to explain that it's not the organism itself, but they still feel that it's, it is that virus or bacteria you're getting in, especially with the newer vaccines like the mRNA vaccine.
Is there even an estimate how many Americans are not crazy about vaccines, to put it that way? Have we ever estimated that?
Not all vaccines are created equal.
Okay.
In terms of people's perceptions of them. And so childhood vaccines are a different sort of dynamic because
Gotcha.
it's largely a conversation between parents or caregivers and a physician. And so it wasn't my choice whether or not to get my measles vaccine when I was a kid. That was, I was not yet able to make that decision. Whereas the conversation around COVID vaccines is quite different, and it's also different from flu vaccines. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's this again with that sort of tendency for people to sort of have this binary: you're either pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. There are lots of people who would say they're pro-vaccine, but if you ask, did you get your flu shot this year? Like, well, not really. Like, well, let's talk about why that is. Is it the inconvenience? Is it because you didn't want to have your arm sore that day or whatever? It's people have reasons. Even I was a little overdue for a vaccine yesterday, so my arm is just a tiny bit sore today. It's fine, but even someone who cares very deeply about this, like, well, I had to find time in my schedule to go do this, and like, what if I wanted to do something later that day? Like, what if I felt a little sick?
I guess in general, what are your thoughts on how we get people to overcome this hesitancy, or is it they're not reachable? Or obviously, you two would like more people to get vaccinated. Do you have some thoughts on how we break through some of the misinformation?
Well, I think education, as much as you can do. I mean, I remember when and I still lecture somewhat on it, but the human papillomavirus vaccine, the HPV vaccine, and it was like, well, my kids don't get exposed to STDs, and why should I get it, and this and that. So I approached it a different way. I approached it, and I had lot of individuals from the community come in, not kids, but the parents and stuff. And I said, look, this is a cancer-producing organism. It's not just an organism that'll make you sick and create a few little lesions on your genitals and it goes away. This can cause cancer, cervical cancer, anal cancer, oral head and neck cancer. I said, and you can actually prevent this by getting the vaccine. And what I found very interestingly was after the lectures, I had the parents come up, especially the mothers, and say, can I get that vaccine? I really need that vaccine. And they were, or outside the age range, although now it's changed. But I had them convinced that this was not just something to prevent an STD, but it was to prevent a cancer. So I try to educate them fully on what the vaccines do and the different vaccines and how they're effective and what are the consequences if you don't get the vaccine. And, it can be a lot worse than. And so I think just trying to give them the full education and explain to them how the vaccine is made and that's not, and do it in as simple terms as possible. And the more you educate, and some you're never going to get to.
Right.
Some are just convinced that it's not a good thing, and you can talk to you're blue in the face, and you just can't do much there. And with my AIDS patients, because they're so immunocompromised, many of them, because of the if they're, especially if they're AIDS and they don't get the vaccine, then I have to find other ways of controlling, viruses, especially like COVID-19. Like if they get, it, then talk to them about Paxlovid or something where at least I can treat them still so that they don't get seriously ill. But, you look for alternatives if you can't convince them.
Sean?
I think one of the most important thing is just to take people seriously and to listen to what their concerns are. So just like there isn't a single reason to not get vaccinated, there's not a single attitude towards all vaccines. There are different reasons why people want to do them. And so if you want to have a real conversation, then you have to actually find out like what are your concerns? Mm-hmm. Can you say what you've heard? And I'd like to listen to that. And here's another piece of information that you can take into account. And you don't want to just beat somebody over the head with the information, and you don't want to do what's called the deficit model of science communication, where you just say, well, obviously, if you had the right information in your brain, then we would just fix all these problems. So if you just understood, and so I'm just going to tell you this information, and then once I've said that, it's like, okay, good, now you believe all the right things, and so now you're going to do what I say. And that's not really how it works.
That makes so much sense.
If it worked that way, then teaching would be so much easier. Oh, my God. But it sure isn't.
What about this concept of herd immunity?
Yeah, the more people that are vaccinated, the more, obviously you get that protection because you have few areas where the virus can infect people. But then if everybody feels that, well, if you three get it, then I don't have to worry. And then if he feels, well, if I get it, then all of a sudden that herd, you get less and less people. They're depending on others to get the vaccine besides themselves. So you have to be very, very careful of that concept. Plus, you have to remember in this day and age, and I keep bringing this up over and over, everybody's not created equal. Everybody doesn't have an immune system that may be able to cope with the pathogen. So you have more and more and more. I forget what the percent is, but it's 3% or so of the whole is immunocompromised to some degree. So those individuals really require that herd immunity because many of them don't respond to the vaccine. So they're dependent on everybody else to protect them. And should they get the virus, that's when the mortality go extremely high. So you really, that concept is important, but we have to understand, and people have to understand as well. And that's one area I forgot to mention. When I explain vaccines to patients, I say, where do you live? And, well, I live with my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather. I said, well, do you realize that they don't have a good immune system? And so by you coming home and maybe having a COVID or whatever, that you may not get sick, you may do very good, but they may get deathly sick and they may die from the infection. I've actually had patients where that's happened, families. So I try to explain all that to them and try to explain that concept.
Yeah, so no one's holding any adult down and giving them a vaccine against their will. Even when the Supreme Court considered this over 100 years ago, it was over I believe it was a $5 ticket. I mean, $5 was worth a lot more then, but still, it was the question about, can we ever sort of say it is your responsibility as a member of a community to get vaccinated? And at the time, the Supreme Court said yes. Their reasoning for it was pretty faulty, and it was sort of changed over time as far as what the law says. But even then, it's not a matter of anyone disputing. It is of course your individual choice whether you want to get your flu shot or whether you want to get your COVID shot or whatever the thing is. If you're a minor, then it's more complicated, and so it's not a question of what you have to do. It's a question of what is the right thing to do. And so if you were going to be around other people who you could hurt by being exposed to something and then passing it to them, then you should take that into account as a way of trying to protect the people around you, your loved ones, your neighbors. This is a thing that to me is a social justice issue. How do we take care of each other? It's hard out there. It's not all that difficult to do it. It's a little discomfort in your arm for a day for most of us. And then the benefit is quite enormous for a lot of these.
And, you know, with vaccines, too, sometimes you prevent these changes in, you know, like with COVID, we were seeing all these different variants form, and we still see variants form. And, you know, if we allow the virus to proliferate more, you know, eventually, you know, right now we're dealing with the COVID that's relatively, I don't want to say benign, but it's not like the Delta strain where people were going in the hospital and having, you know, really horrible respiratory problems in the COVID storm. But who knows, if we allow them to mutate more, we may be getting that super virus again. So trying to suppress it or get that herd immunity so we don't have that virus continuing in the environment and growing and changing and mutating is another reason why, you know, vaccines could be very important.
Yeah, well, Peter and Sean, thanks so much for this great information. Sean, just some final thoughts on vaccinations you'd like to leave us with.
You know, 99% of the time, no matter whether it's in healthcare or some other thing, it's usually a good idea to try to spend a little bit of time preventing the problem instead of dealing with it once it's already a crisis. Whether it's your finances or relationships or car problems or whatever it is, like spend the few minutes of dealing with it now instead of having to deal with it once it becomes a real problem. And so vaccines are just the perfect example of that. You know, you can get the shot now, and then that is a thing you don't have to worry about at all, or something that's just not as much. And so just that tiny bit of investment in prevention, so you don't have to have the crisis that pops up unexpectedly, and you have to miss work, and you don't know who's going to take care of your family, and you're not, and maybe you have long-term consequences from an infection. Sometimes the infection goes away, but then you have respiratory problems, you have headaches. There are all sorts of different things that can happen after an infection, and so just that small investment in prevention, it's just usually a good call.
I guess one last thing, and it goes with Sean here, with the bioethics and everything. Respect each patient you deal with. Respect their feelings, respect their thoughts, respect what they... So sometimes you can't convince everybody, but respect their thoughts about it, their fears, and don't just keep pushing them or belittling them, or basically, because I've had patients come to me where they said, well, doctor, my doctor or my healthcare provider never explained it as good as you did. He just said, get it, and if you don't get it, then you're just going to get sick and you may die, and just left it that way. Whereas you went into more, you know, and you respected what I said and listened. So I think the respect is a big thing, too. You can win people more over with honey than just... You know, yeah.
And the same thing at the dinner table too. So it's very easy to sort of to look across and sort of judge somebody for the choices they made with their healthcare decisions, and like well, they made those decisions for reasons, and what are those reasons, and can you respect them enough to listen to them and to enter into dialogue? And sometimes there's just no crossing that bridge. That is possible,
right?
But is it most of the time? I don't think it is most of the time. I think usually there is room for people to move.
Absolutely.
So really talk with your primary care physician is the first thing to do, I guess, right? So
my guests on this episode of MSU Today have been Peter Gulick, Professor of Osteopathic Medical Specialties at the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Sean Valles, Professor and Director of the MSU College of Human Medicine's Center for Bioethics and Social Justice. And I'm Russ White. This is MSU Today.